So, how long have you worked here?
I've worked here for 6.5 years.
Oh, okay. Okay, and then what did Human Resources do to make sure that you were genuine in taking care of the residents? If you remember.
I do. I had a couple of different interviews. First, I was interviewed by the rehab operations manager, and she asked me several questions, just kind of gave me different scenarios, basically different ethical dilemmas, and asked me questions about patient care. And then I took a HIPAA compliancy test also.
And then you took the HIPAA compliancy tests.
Yes.
And what is that exactly?
It was a series of questions about privacy. For example, it asked, it asked the procedures for protecting patient information, and it also gave different scenarios. For example, it said and I watched a video as well. I just remembered that there was also a video that I watched, and one of the samples in the video was of a neighbor. You're coming home from work, the employee, and the neighbor was outside gardening and said, "Hey, don't you work at the such and such facility?" And the employee said yes, and said, "Oh, well, my aunt is there. How's she doing? Can you tell me how things are going?" And in the video, the employee gave the information, and they stopped the video and asked us, "So is that a HIPAA violation or not?" And we had to answer yes or no. And in this case, it was.
Okay, that's good. In your opinion, what characteristics and skills should an employee have in order to work here?
I think the employee has to have empathy is the number one. You have to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and be able to imagine how you would feel if you were in those shoes. Because this is a healthcare industry, we have a lot of people that come to us that are very sick, and they have family members that are very concerned about their welfare. And in some cases, we even have family members that have different family dynamic issues. Maybe there's a healthcare power of attorney, and someone else in the family may not agree with what the healthcare power of attorney wishes to do regarding the healthcare. Or the other end of the spectrum, in some cases there's no healthcare power of attorney, no durable power of attorney, and families can sometimes fight over what is best for their loved one that is in our care. So we have a lot of different issues we have to deal with, so we have to be very sensitive to the different family dynamics, and ultimately make sure that we're doing what's in the best interest of the patient. And protecting their rights.
So what the family wants and what the patient is.
What's in their best interest. And sometimes they're not in agreement.
Okay. So, what were you trained to do? Like, when you were being employed, were you trained to handle a situation where abuse was involved?
Yes. In the video that I watched during orientation, of course, it gave different scenarios regarding abuse, verbal abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and the different elements and different types of abuse, and how those different situations are to be handled. And then every quarter, we have another method that the company uses to remind us about those things. It's called Silverchair, and it's an online learning tool. So we basically log into the Silverchair modules, and we read the reading, and then we answer the questions at the end, which is like a test, and we have to get a certain score on that test in order to move on to the next module. and if we don't, we have to retake it. So that's the way that the company makes sure that everything we learn during orientation and during the hiring process, we retain it.
Oh, so these tests are just to make sure that later on you won't forget how to handle abuse.
Exactly, just reminders.
Oh, okay.
And then we also have different drills periodically. We have like a disaster drills and emergency preparedness drills, so that we'll know how to handle an emergency situation, because sometimes issues of abuse can be a danger not only to the patient but to other people as well.
Okay, so like it's like natural disasters as well as for abuse. These emergency
Right.
drills.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Emergency preparedness.
So, like, what would be an instance of emergency for abuse? Because I don't really understand that one.
Well, for example, there was a nursing home in Southern Pines about, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, where a family member walked in and was for some reason upset with the family member and started shouting at employees and cursing and started shooting.
Oh, so it's not just the residents who can be abused, the employees can be abused.
Right. Sometimes issues pertaining to the resident can affect other people. And we've had other issues that also where the abuse could be resident on resident or resident on staff member. Some of our residents have psychological issues. Some of them have certain, maybe dementia or certain cognitive issues, and that might cause them to have behaviors that are difficult to manage. So we have to be trained in how to handle those things.
So sometimes it may not be on purpose when a resident abuses another resident or an employee.
Right. It could just be the person's mind is not functioning the way
Okay.
other people's do.
If you found out a resident was being abused, what would you do, aside from what you learned in the orientation?
Well, I would follow the procedures that I've been trained to do. So the first thing to do is, if the abuse is going on and I witnessed it, I would remove the resident from the abusive situation, and then I would report to my supervisor, which in this case is the administrator. And when abuse does occur in the facility, we're also required to call the police, because there has to be a criminal investigation done as well. So we actually have to get law enforcement involved.
So, like, the abuser is also now a criminal.
Exactly. If they're convicted, yes.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Now, if the abuser is not cognitively intact, then they cannot be held criminally responsible if they don't know what they're doing, or if they're not able to determine right from wrong. And usually a psychological evaluation would be done to determine that by a psychiatrist.
So the abuser wouldn't be held fully accountable.
If they are not cognitively aware of what they're doing.
And then a psychiatrist would have to investigate.
Right, and make that determination.
Okay.
But if the abuse is employee related, the employee would be suspended while an investigation is being conducted, either with or without pay. That would be up to the discretion of the employee supervisor. If they think the employee is guilty, they may suspend them without pay. And then after they finish a lengthy investigation of the allegations, then they would determine whether the employee needed to be terminated. And if abuse is found to be the case, again, they would call the police and seek legal counsel as well.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot.
It is.
Okay. how can you tell if a resident is being abused or mistreated? If you don't witness it, but how can you tell?
That's a good question. There are different signs of abuse, and that is also a part of our training, how to know signs of abuse. One sign, an obvious sign, is bruises of unknown origin. Bruises or marks on the body, or cuts or scratches of unknown origin. Another would be the demeanor of the resident changing. Maybe the resident would become withdrawn. That could potentially be a sign. Maybe someone who's normally outgoing and talkative, they might become withdrawn and just start, stop socializing, or maybe isolate themselves from other people.
Okay.
Another sign would be fear. If a resident all of a sudden becomes fearful or doesn't want to be touched, that can be another sign.
Okay.
And those are the three most common ones. Sometimes the resident might become agitated easily, angry, making outbursts, or become very emotional.
Okay. And my next question is, what else can you do to prevent abuse from occurring?
The best way to prevent abuse is, number one, through education. And it can't just be at the time of an employee is hired. The company does a good job of doing background checks. If anyone has a criminal history, they will not hire them. They also require fingerprints for anyone who applies for a job here, but they have not been a resident of North Carolina for at least 5 years. I had to do that. I moved here from another state, so I had to have my fingerprints taken. So those are very good ways to prevent abuse from on the front end. But at the same time, because we work with a population of people that are sick and vulnerable, and sometimes they can be angry and agitated. So because we work with that type of population, it's really good to do ongoing training with the staff to make sure that they remember the procedures and the guidelines and know the signs of abuse. Because the company policy is that if we are aware of abuse and we fail to report it, we are just as guilty as the person doing the abuse, and we would also be disciplined or terminated.
Oh, okay.
If you're aware of abuse and don't report it, you're just as guilty.
It's like you're letting something happen.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And so the ongoing training is also good. Like I said, every quarter we have those learning modules, and that's a good way to remind everyone. And then if we see something suspicious, we should just report it, even if we have doubt. If we think in the least way that it's suspicious, we need to report it.
Even if it is a false alarm in the end.
Right.
Oh, okay. Okay, and my last question is, do you enjoy working here?
I do. I love it. Like I said, I've been here 6.5 years, and I have a lot of psychology background, so I love the psychological aspect of my job and working with people that have cognitive issues or that are depressed. People that are hurting or suffering. I like to work with people and feel like I'm making a difference in their life and in their family's life, because I feel like our patients are not our only responsibility. I feel like we're responsible for their whole families and making sure that the families are pleased with the care that their loved one is receiving, and that the families don't feel guilty. Some people feel guilty because they have to put their loved one in a nursing home. And so our job is also to make the families feel comfortable and at peace with their decision, and just to know that we're doing the best for their loved one, and that everything will be okay. And it's funny this is your topic because we had an issue just today.
Really?
The social worker came to me and said, I need to talk to you. And she said, a resident reported that an employee slapped him.
Oh, wow.
We knew that it wasn't true because of the resident. We know that he can be very mean and angry, and it's very important for the nurses and all the staff to document behaviors. Whenever we have a resident that has behaviors where they're angry and mean and agitated, they have to document that so that when they make false allegations against employees, then we have some evidence, that supports that this patient would make this up. And so I went and talked to the patient, and when I talked to him, he didn't repeat it. I asked him, had anything happened this morning that he didn't agree with or that made him uncomfortable, that he didn't like, and he said no. He told me of some words he had with an employee, but he didn't say that the employee hit him.
Oh.
So we knew that
He probably didn't even remember.
he didn't remember. You're
Okay.
right.
Wow.
So we knew that was made up. Either he didn't remember or he knew that he thought about it later and realized that he could really get someone in trouble, because we came back to interview him with the social worker, and I think he realized how important that could be. So he either forgot or he changed his mind and decided not to go forward with the lie. But I asked him several times, are you sure nothing else happened? Anything else happened? And he kept telling me, nope, that was it, So so I knew that in that case the resident was making that up. But that social worker did the right thing. Even though she knew that employee would never do anything like that, we still have to follow all the rules and do the investigation. And that happened just today.
Wow. How long did it take for that?
Oh my gosh, about an hour.
Oh, wow.
Because she had to write down everything he said, and then I had to get statements from the employees who witnessed it, and I have those right here. So it was definitely a lot of time that we had to dedicate to that because we have to follow the rules. And even though we know that type of patient would, make things up that aren't true, we still had to follow all of the steps and investigate.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
I know.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're
for letting me
welcome.
interview you.
Thank you.
So, employees do have background checks, but what specifically do you look for in those checks? Like, are there any red flags or anything that you like seeing?
Okay, when the employee's background check records come back, I want to make sure they have no felonies. I want to make sure that they don't have any where they've been in prison or placed on probation or parole. Now, sometimes background checks will come back and people have traffic violations. We don't really pay that any attention. If we've got, they can have traffic violations, worthless checks. That will also show up on background checks. If anyone has anything where they're stealing or anything like that, we really don't want them around our residents, so they can take anything from our resident.
Like larceny.
Larceny, right.
Okay. So traffic violations, you really disregard that kind of stuff. And then for worthless checks,
we'll disregard that.
Okay. And then, but what you really don't like is larceny.
Right.
Okay.
Or if they have any domestic charges, spousal abuse, or anything like that, we don't want anyone here with a history of that.
Okay. Anything else that you don't like or like seeing on applications?
And we
besides
also do
that?
drug tests, and the drug test must be negative in order for us to hire the individual. If it comes back positive, we do not offer them a position.
Okay. They must be negative, meaning no drugs in the
No
system.
drugs, right.
Okay.
Now, sometimes they do come back positive, but the individual does have a prescription for the drug, and the company that does have drug testing will contact them, and as long as they have a prescription for what is showing positive, then we will hire them because it's been given to them by a doctor. We're looking for marijuana, cocaine, things like that coming back.
Like illegal drugs.
Illegal drugs, correct.
Okay. What, like, besides the background checks,
Mhm.
what characteristics or requirements do you look for in a potential staff member?
Okay. Well, as I'm the HR specialist,
Mhm.
and I really don't interview for the nursing department. The managers interview for the individual departments in the building, but they're looking for someone who enjoys working with the elderly.
Mm-hmm.
We're also looking for someone who has good attendance. You know, they look at their application to see if they're a job hopper. Like and you look for gaps in employment because you want to ask, well, you didn't work here for 5 years. What were you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, those type of things. And they're going through the application looking at, they have to list their employment history.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So not just in terms of like you come in every day, but in terms of like, yeah, can you keep a job for this long?
Mm-hmm,
Oh, okay.
mm-hmm. And you know, you ask them, what do you like about long-term care at your other facilities? What did you not like about long-term care? You may ask them a question, why should I choose you as the candidate to work here? What can you bring to Royal Park? What can you add to our team? Are you flexible? Because in healthcare, you have to be flexible.
Yeah, especially with your time. I know it takes up a lot of time to be to work in the medical field.
Yes, it
the
does.
healthcare
Yes,
field.
it does.
Okay. Anything else that any hiring manager or specialist would like to see?
Well, now they're going to ask details specific to what you're applying for. If you're a CNA, how many patients are you used to taking care of? If you're a nurse, how many patients are you used to taking care of? They're going to ask them what are their skill sets. For example, nurses, can you draw blood? What special training do you have? CNAs, have you worked with, are you a restorative? Are you a CNA too? We also make sure that their license are current, because they have to renew their license, CNAs and nurses. And we pull that before we hire them to make sure they have a current North Carolina license.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay. Do you train employees on how to handle situations in which abuse is involved?
They go through orientation when they're hired. And the SDC, which is our Staff Development Coordinator, goes through abuse and neglect training during the orientation process. And then we have learning modules that are called Silverchair. And in Silverchair, there are modules on abuse and neglect that everybody that works in the building is required to take. We do those quarterly, 4 times a year. And one of the modules is on abuse and neglect, how to spot it, how to report it, those type things.
Okay, so they're given quarterly, and in order to they use those just to make sure that you remember everything, how to handle abuse besides from when you started here.
That's correct. And you have to take a pre-test and a post-test once you go through the learning modules.
Okay, to ensure abuse is handled correctly. That's really good.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like they're not. So it doesn't. So these happen just in case like they get trained and then 2 years later something happens and they don't know what to do.
Right.
Yeah. So just to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
See right here where it says Silverchair Long-Term Care?
Mm-hmm.
When I click on there, okay, right now I'm a student.
What is the SDC again?
Staff Development Coordinator.
So the SDC
trains them in orientation, and then, okay, we are required to do our Silverchair, and one of the modules, it may not be in this quarter, will come up in its own elder abuse.
Mm-hmm.
We have gone to, okay, for example, this tells you right here, let's take a quick look. Okay. In this group, we're not reporting suspected crimes under the Federal Elder Justice Act. So then what happens, the employee clicks on there, and then you see how it says pre-test and post-test, and I can just give you an example. Okay. The Federal Elder Just Act is a law and must be obeyed. Is it true or false? And they'll click true. And then you'll go to the next. You submit your answer. And that's how the module goes. Failure to report in the required time frame and result in disparate action up, including to termination. So everybody in the building is seeing this and they're answering the questions. And even if they don't pass the pre-test, then you go through all the modules. And then there's a post-test.
The post-test makes sure that they actually learned
That's right,
everything
what's
in the
in the
modules.
module.
Okay.
Okay, so that's how that works.
That's good.
Okay.
So other staff members like janitors and cooks can be overlooked when being hired. Like, what goes on in their employment process?
Okay, same thing. Okay, let's start for Royal Park. Our dietary department is contracted out through Gallons. But Gallons also does background checks, they do drug tests, and once they hire those employees, they are brought to me, the results. Then I take it to our administrator who looks over that results to make sure that he wants that employee to work here.
Okay.
Our housekeeping, which we call environmental service department, it's hired through Liberty. So the supervisor or manager of that department hires the individuals he wants to work. After interviewing them, they go through the same process with the drug test, the background checks, the references. But they are Royal Park employees.
Okay. So it's like, it's kind of like how other, like the nurses and therapists are hired. It's just they're not exactly hired directly through Royal Park.
The housekeeping, yes, but the food service, no. They're contracted department here at Royal Park.
Okay. So they do kind of go through the same things like the background checks.
And they go through our orientation, so they hear, everybody goes through background checks, fingerprints. I did forget to say that. Fingerprints. I do fingerprints if the employee that we hired has not lived in the state of North Carolina
for
5 years or more, and then I send those off to the SBI, State Bureau of Investigation, and then they'll send me a report back as to if any records were found.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure because sometimes in other facilities in other states, like they forget about those employees, and then sometimes their checks aren't completed when they hire them. From what I've
But if I offer you a job, everything comes back fine, and then on your I set off your fingerprints. If they come back and something's on there, then we have the right to not continue that employment with the not to continue that person's employment. Also, have you heard of E-Verify? That's with the Homeland Security and the E-Verify.
Yeah.
So everyone that is hired also is checked to make sure they're legal to work in the United States of America. And I have to go out and put their information in, and then it comes back that they're legal to work here.
So like also if you want to be employed here at Royal Park, you have to be a citizen.
That is correct.
Oh, okay.
Because E-Verify is nationwide. I know North Carolina started ours back October 1st of last year, but it's eventually going to go nationwide in all states. You'll go, like when you go out to eat somewhere, it'll say we use E-Verify. They'll have a poster up and everything.
Okay.
And we had to have special training for that. Going through. I did to be able to be cleared.
Okay. Well, here at Royal Park, are you able to tell me how often abuse is reported?
As soon as it happens. As soon as somebody reports it, we act on it.
So as soon as it happens,
it's reported to the supervisor. And most of that is in nursing. And then a nurse is going to call her manager. And then they immediately notify the director of nursing. And that's 24 hours a day, not just 7 to 3. They will call, if it's in the middle of the night, they will wake the director of nursing up. And that person that the allegation is against will have to be sent home because we remove them from the facility. Not saying they're guilty, but while we're doing the investigation. Sure. Right.
So like the employee suspended and then an investigation starts.
Put them on administrative leave is what we call it.
And do they leave with or without pay, or is that determined?
They're determined at the end of the investigation. If it's unsubstantiated, meaning it didn't happen, we couldn't find that it happened, they are paid. If it's substantiated, it just depends on what happened. Sometimes they are brought back, but they are not paid. It happened, but, we know it happened, but we still can bring them back to work, but we don't pay them. Each individual case is taken separate, because the DON has a call on that. We know what the person said happened, and it wasn't really abuse. That's how it was looked at, but then they can come back to work and we don't pay them for that time. But if it was substantiated, a lot of times that person may be terminated, and then that information is turned into the healthcare registry, and they may choose to come in and do an investigation, and that person their license could be revoked, or it could be found unsubstantiated, and they're still able to keep their license. We don't have control over that if they come in and interview.
Oh, okay. So it's like beyond the reporting. Okay, so when abuse is reported, what measures are taken?
Okay. First of all, the employee is suspended, put on administrative leave, the person that's involved. Then the DON is called, report to the supervisor. Then the DON is notified. And then he comes in and he does the 24-hour report to the healthcare registry. Because most of the time, the abuse, neglect is against CNAs. Not all the time, but most of the time. But they're doing the basic hands-on care. Then he has a 5-day report that he has to get back into the healthcare registry from the date of the 24 report. You'll see that on the form I gave you of his findings. He'll send in what his investigation is, any statements he received from the individual, the actual person that the allegations against, and any of the witnesses, if there were any witnesses.
Okay, so any statements from the resident and the employees.
And the social worker will interview the resident that is claiming the abuse, and she will also interview other residents on that hall that same CNA is taking care of to see if there's been any issues.
Oh, okay. What happens after that?
After that, then once he does the 5-day report, it's either substantiated or unsubstantiated, and then the employees call back in, and the DON meets with him or her and lets them know the outcome. If it was unsubstantiated, they're going to get paid for the time that's off. If it was substantiated, they may be brought back depending on what the allegation was, and they will not be paid. Also, it could include termination based on what the actual abuse is.
Like how extreme it was.
That's correct.
Oh, okay. Okay. What else do you do to prevent abuse?
No more than training, walking around, looking to see if you see anybody being ugly to the patient, just walking, there's somebody walking
like
constantly, supervising the CNA work, the nurses are supervising the CNA work, because most of the time when it's an abuse allegation, it is for the certified nursing assistant, not that nurses can't be reported for the same, for abuse as well. But that's basically all we do, just training, like I say, your modules, we go over it with them in orientation, they're given information on abuse.
Okay, so no more than training and just plain supervision. Because everything else, the abuse would happen. Sometimes it happens not under the supervisor's.
Correct.
Side.
Correct.
Okay.
All right.